Welcome to SEC Football Live from the 440 Sports Network. I am Braden Gall. We are brought to you by ML Rose. Of course, that is 6 great locations. Wait a second. Hang on. Look up in that corner. There's the ML Rose logo right there over Steven's head. That is Steven Lassan. We are brought to you by ML Rose. 6 great locations. A 7th coming soon to Inglewood in my neighborhood. Cannot wait for that. But craft, beer, and burgers, the best place to go watch a game. Basketball, I guess, now. Right, Steven? So go check out ML Rose. I'll tell you more about those burgers coming up in just a second. In the burger of the month in February. Steven Lassan joining us from Athlon Sports, the man, the myth, and the legend when it comes to the Athlon Sports preseason top 25, a guy that I have worked with and done podcasts with for almost 20 years, Steven. How are you, sir?
Braden, I am doing well. It is good to be with you, sir. Here we are. One season ends, and we are starting anew on 2025 already. Work has begun on the 2025 Athlon Sports magazine. So here we are, right? Ready to go again.
Absolutely. And you're the guy I wanted to talk with about the top 25 because it is your baby. It is you are the one putting it together. And I used to be of service to you when we were putting the magazine together. And for those that do not know, Steven and I do a podcast called Athlon U for Athlon Sports. Make sure you check it out on their YouTube page, of course. If you care about the stuff that we're talking about today, you will probably care about the content that we do on that product as well. So make sure you check that out. We cover all 135 teams.
136.
136.
Delaware and Missouri State are officially in the family now.
All right. Okay. So we've been doing that for, God, that pod's been going since 2014, the first year of our Lord and Savior, the college football playoff expansion. So make sure you check that out, 2014. So Steven and I have been doing that. So if you care about college football and you want to watch us talk about other stuff, make sure you check out the Athlon Sports YouTube page. We are going to cover all 16 teams today in the SEC, where they are ranked in the preseason, way too early, preseason top 25. But this is what we do, Steven. We start with a list and we organize a group of teams and rankings in January following the championship game. Then we add to it signing day and the portal. Then we continue to add to it when it comes to roster attrition, players transferring, players leaving, all this stuff. And it sort of just morphs and evolves before we put the magazine out in May. And if you want to ask about one of your teams in the SEC, please, by all means, jump into the comment section. We are available for you for the next hour, as it is great to have Steven here live talking college football rankings. We'll get to the teams that are unranked first, of course, in college football. Then we'll touch on some of the teams that are ranked very highly that are not in the SEC, and we're going to work our way through all 16 teams today. Do you have, before we get started, Steven, first of all, tell everybody where they should go, check your workout, and maybe what magazines are available currently for you sports fans out there.
Absolutely. So you can check out all my work at athlonsports.com. You can check out my work over on, follow me on Twitter, I guess, at Athlon Steven, Steven LCFB over on Facebook and Instagram. Great news for sports fans, I guess, because we have our racing, baseball, and NFL draft magazines all either on newsstands now or hitting soon. And I mentioned it earlier, we are already knee-deep into magazine production for college football. So it won't be long. We've got some great publications with NFL and fantasy coming as well. So plenty of things going on at Athlon Sports to keep you sports fans occupied until football season starts again.
I like the big, massive mega tracks. I like Daytona. But I've switched from racing on Sundays in the offseason to golf because my wife loves it. I like it. I'm old. We'll watch it together. And she wants to play now, which I'm a little torn on, like it's kind of my sanctuary out there on the course. I don't get to play often. So when I do, not sure I want to be with her, even though I love her very much, but she's into golf now. So I've kind of given up on the racing. That being said, go New York Mets, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso back, ready to go. If you want all the stuff there, make sure you check out Athlon Sports everywhere you get your magazines. Buy them online as well. The draft mag is always a great, great asset to have heading into draft week. And heading into the NFL draft. So check all that great stuff out. So first and foremost, before we get into each individual team, I'm just curious, was there any, when you start to put the rankings together, you and I kind of always land on some themes, let's call it, about certain teams or conferences or positions. Is there anything about the SEC, like 0 coaching changes last year, totally weird and bizarre, probably not going to be the case this year. Quarterback play, is there anything that you noticed about the rosters and starting to look at these rankings heading into this season that you think is worth noting from a thematic standpoint. If that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I actually think there are two of the things you mentioned there are kind of like serious themes of the season. Number one is quarterback play. I think that this is going to be the best conference for quarterbacks in college football next year. Arch Manning, of course, is going to be significantly hyped. I have him already as my preseason kind of top quarterback in the SEC, but you got a bunch of others, Garrett Nussmeier, DJ Lagway, Lenora Sellers. So great conference for quarterbacks. Coaching situations too. Not only is it coaches on the hot seat, I think it's coaches like Kalen DeBoer, Brian Kelly, kind of coaches trying to take the next step essentially, which leads me to the third thing. And I feel like even though we have two favorites, in my opinion, at the top of the league, I do think this is a little bit more wide open maybe than we've seen. Certainly Georgia, Texas are getting all of the preseason buzz to be the favorites and rightfully so. But I think there's some reasons to think that another team or two is going to emerge in that top tier, and it feels very open. And maybe depending on how coaching quarterbacks hit, kind of shapes the rest of the predictions in the league.
I will say I think there's a couple teams that are not ranked. We're actually going to start with those teams here soon that I think can surprise some folks, jump up into the rankings, be top 25 teams. There's a couple that I might peg to take a step back in the top 25, but it does feel like there's a clear tier. That's a lot of teams on that second tier, and we'll get to where they're all ranked. But there are probably 5 or 6 teams that are all right there that we think could challenge for playoff spots or the SEC championship game. Some will not. Some will fail miserably. Some will jump up. Some might just kind of be where they are. But we just don't know who's going to be who. We'll give you our best guess coming up, and Steven's got all those teams ranked. Let's start with the unranked teams that are not in the top 25. 10 teams, by the way, in the top 25 for your early preseason Athlon Sports top 25, which means the league is going to dominate the rankings heading into the season. Your rankings, Steven, have largely been pretty close to where the polls start in August when we get done with all the media days. So you're basically the one who starts all this stuff, and now you're starting it in January. So are
you saying that my rankings sort of bias the polls or are kind of shaping them?
You're a thought leader, sir. You're a thought leader.
Hey, actually, I did have another thought on the kind of how this conference shapes up for 2025, and we saw this last year, and I think this will be kind of a theme too. I feel like we talked Georgia and Texas; they'll be at the top, but it feels like the portal has made the middle class stronger in the SEC, and maybe the top isn't as top heavy, if you will. I don't know if you would agree with that, but that seems to be a theme, and we saw it last year. We'll see if it plays out this year too.
Well, Godfrey on the show constantly is telling me that that's a permanent change due to the dynamics that have changed in the sport, and that the SEC, won't be as dominant as it once was. I still think it will be the most dominant league and the best league, but I'm willing to concede that if there is going to be more strength in the middle, to your point, then it has to sort of come from somewhere. And if it's going to come from somewhere, then maybe we don't have the most dominant team ever in this conference. That being said, I don't feel like last year's, people say failings. It's like, look, the Big Ten has won 2 titles in 25 years. Like, let's chill out. I'm not super concerned with what happened. I think it was a function of not having a great quarterback coach combination. It's not a coincidence that Saban retired. I just, I think it's a lot of other factors that I think that are in there as well. So Randy says Lassan has Arch number 1. He's good with me. Yeah. Arch Manning, number 1 in Texas football history in yards per attempt and quarterback rating of anybody with more than 50 pass attempts. I just want to point that out.
I need Randy to kind of take up for me in the internet. I've been getting a bunch of flack for ranking Arch Manning number 1 on some of my early preseason rankings among quarterbacks. So
I'm trying to think. I mean, if it was a draft in the NFL, he would be number 1 for sure, without even a doubt. I don't have a problem with that. We'll get to the conversation because I think that you're right. It is going to be the best quarterback in the league. The question is, just like last year at this time, how good are the rising stars going to be? And that's what we had. We asked that same question last year. You and I talked about it. Jackson Arnold, Nico, neither of them, Connor Wigman, all guys we were excited about. None of those guys delivered on the hype that we maybe thought they had at the beginning of last season. All right, so let's start with the teams that are unranked. And I'm going to throw these up on the screen. So if you're on YouTube, thumbs up, notifications on. If you're watching on Twitter or Facebook, you'll be able to see this so you can follow along a little bit easier. But we're going to start with the unranked teams in the Athlon Sports top 25. And we'll start with Auburn. You've got them basically at number 30 in the nation. I actually think Auburn is a team with an influx of talent on offense around the quarterback position, an influx of talent at the quarterback position with Jackson Arnold. I think this Auburn team could be very dangerous, super volatile, which is tradition on the Plains. But I think this Auburn team could be a super – I think they could absolutely overperform where we've got them ranked, which is 11th in the conference and 30th overall nationally.
I would agree with that. So if you look at some of the underlying metrics last season, and I'll just get like really super nerdy with you, but if you look like a point differential, like yards per play differential, yards differential in the conference, Auburn had some pretty solid numbers. Like to suggest that they were probably a little bit better than their record. They did have some bad luck with whether it was injuries or turnovers or just bizarre plays. But I think you kind of said the right word there, and that is volatility. And there's a lot of potential for this team. It would not surprise me if they end up in our preseason top 25. It would also not surprise me if they finish 6-7 and have the third straight losing season under Hugh Freeze. I think a lot about where this team ends up comes back to quarterback play. Peyton Thorne was, inconsistent, wasn't bad at times. Can Jackson Arnold sort of raise the ceiling here for Auburn? Because you look at their receivers, I mean, they might have the best receiving core in the SEC. It's certainly one of the best in the country next year. So this gets back to the X factors, I would say, for this season, and how Jackson Arnold performs is probably going to carry a lot of weight. There's a lot of reasons that, hey, they are recruiting really well at Auburn. They got a lot of talent. Can Hugh Freeze realize that potential with maybe an upgrade at quarterback if Jackson Arnold hits?
What's interesting about Arnold, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but don't you think he's got the right skill set to run Hugh Freeze's offense? He ran the football a lot better than I think anybody expected at Oklahoma last year, despite having, kind of being yo-yoed in and out of the lineup. I think he's got the right talent and skills at the right places. They got great receivers, and the offensive line's better, and Hugh Freeze is calling the plays. So am I wrong to think that about Jackson Arnold?
No, not at all. I mean, he had over 400 rushing yards last season at Oklahoma. And also, I think the other question is, like, there's kind of two competing theories, I think, in your mind when you start thinking about Jackson Arnold next season. Like, one is Oklahoma's offensive line was so bad and they had so many injuries, and the receivers were also banged up too. How much of that is taken into account his play and also like his performance too, which was up and down, but they had all these factors in there. And so you could envision that, hey, he's going to a system now where Hugh Freeze, I think he's a pretty good play caller. They've got great receivers. The offensive line should be solid, to your point. I could easily see him sort of living up to his 5-star status coming out of high school.
I just think he kind of got a raw deal. Not a raw deal, but like maybe not a fair situation. Certainly, fired the offensive coordinator, Seth Luttrell. We'll get to Ben Arbuckle in just a second. He wasn't great, but he's also in his first year, and we're just in a very different place in college football where there is no time to allow a 5-star to find himself. I mean, Tennessee fans frustrated with Nico all year. He's probably going to be great eventually. The question is, again, same question I asked last year about Nico. Does it happen this year or not? We'll see. But I'm just, I thought Jackson Arnold, like 3 interceptions, like you said, over 400 yards rushing. He's got this, like, does he need to be more efficient? Does he need to learn to read the blitz a little bit more, maybe sit in the pocket a little longer? All that stuff's true. But I think he fits Hugh Freeze's system very well. And I think with another year of seasoning in college football at the highest level in the SEC, I think he's going to take major steps forward. So I think Auburn's very dangerous, which is always a great place for the SEC season to start. It's just like, it's like walking into a party knowing full well there's going to be a huge fight.
Also, getting Alabama and Georgia both at home, like traditionally, like they can surprise in those years where they get those teams at home. So, yeah, I mean, everything's set up, it feels like, for this team to easily exceed our 11th early prediction. It's
like going to the high school get-together after the football game, knowing full well that 2 people that hate each other are going to be there and probably fight. Auburn being good, potentially, is what that's like. All right, let's go to number 12 in the power rankings. The Oklahoma Sooners, speaking of, again, I think this is the most interesting team maybe in the entire conference. Brent Venables is under a lot of pressure to succeed in year number 3 after underachieving this past season. I guess it's year number 4. Is it year number 4?
Yeah, it is.
I think it's year number 4 because he had the really bad first year, then the 10 wins, and then the bad last year. So now he's into 4. Fire Seth Luttrell. We talked about it. They're going to bring in a very expensive transfer quarterback in John Mateer, who is super fun to watch. very physical. It's going to feel a lot like 02, 03, 04, 05 Oklahoma. It's going to feel like early Bob Stoops offenses. I think it's going to have some of that Tim Tebow-ish Florida Urban Meyer type of vibes, maybe some Art Briles Baylor type of vibes in terms of the system and how they run it. Ben Arbuckle, the youngest coordinator in college football. A lot to like about the moves they made. Unsure of how good they're going to be. And the defense, of course, should be continually improving under Brent Venables. But they didn't show a lot of signs last year, other than the Alabama game late in the year, that they're ready for the SEC. What makes you think this team? I mean, look, you've got them 12th in the conference, so it's not like you're very high on them.
Also, I would say they're probably like a top 30 to 35 type team right now in the preseason. Like some people have them in their early top 25, but that also, I think, raises the question of how good do you feel about the offense? I don't have a ton of questions about their defense. I think Brent Venables not only recruiting and developing, but taking over the play calling duties. I think that group is going to continue to be one of the better defenses in the SEC. The biggest uncertainty for me surrounding this team just goes back to the offense. And it is one of the hardest questions I've tried to analyze this offseason, because I love what Mateer and Arbuckle did at Washington State. It is going to be difficult, I think, to just run that back in the SEC with the same level of dominance. That being said, if you look at Oklahoma, the offensive problems they had last year, they should be better at receiver. They should be better along the offensive line. And they have a difference maker and an OC who are on the same page there. And so basically you're taking all these ingredients and trying to like microwave a really effective offense as opposed to starting from the ground up. And so having that OC quarterback experience, they're on the same page, they know the system. I think that's going to work for Oklahoma. The question is how effective. If their offense is just a little bit better, you're talking about a team that can improve its win total at least by 1 or 2, I would think.
I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what will happen with Arbuckle and Mateer. I know they're very fun, and I know Oklahoma's and Venables is under a lot of pressure. The schedule is probably not as difficult as it was last year, but still pretty difficult. It is just a fascinating football team, regardless of conference. Just the situation that they're in, if they go into the season unranked and 12th in our power rankings or anybody else's for that matter, Oklahoma fan will not be happy about that. Just in general. I'm not saying that they don't necessarily disagree with it. It's just that we are not happy with where our program is. That will lead to loud noises in Norman, Oklahoma very fast. So they're just a fascinating team to watch. I don't necessarily disagree with your analysis of the depth chart. Do I think they could be better than 35, let's call it, in the country? Do I think they could be better than 12th in the conference? Absolutely. If things go right, I think they could be up in that top 20 range. Just like Auburn, I think they could be top 20. Things have to go right. But I think it's startling to see Texas where they are and Oklahoma where they are. Also, Oklahoma coming off one of its worst recruiting classes in the last 6 to 8 years under, I guess, since the transition from Stoops to Riley to Venables. So the trend line's not exciting right now for Oklahoma, but they are very interesting, much like Auburn.
Circle September 20th on your calendar because Oklahoma and Auburn play that day. I don't know if the SEC may spontaneously combust with the volatile situation at both, but we talk about early hot seat, what could this game mean? That's a pretty important swing game for both teams. So yeah, September 20th, I've got my eyes on that matchup.
And it was an incredible football game last year with all the big plays and the back and forth and the late stuff that happened. It wasn't as crazy in Missouri as in Oklahoma, but it was still pretty crazy. So it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, coming up next on the list, of course, we got number 13, Vanderbilt. The Commodores. Look, there's one name here that matters. That's Diego Pavia. Where in the SEC do you think Diego Pavia ranked in rushing attempts last year?
It's got to be top 10 for sure, right?
Third,
yeah.
Third,
wow.
Dylan Sampson and Wisner for Texas had the only two players in the conference who had more carries. The reason I say that is I wanted to paint a quick picture for everybody out there. I think you could make the case that Diego Pavia was the most valuable player in the conference last year. Vanderbilt had the best season in school history, maybe, with their big wins. They finished with a bowl game, and Pavia captured the entire city's attention. Am I wrong that he might be the most? I didn't say he's the best. I didn't say they had the best team. I just think you could say that Diego Pavia was worth more to his institution than anybody else in the conference last year.
I'm having a hard time coming up with a reason to disagree with that, just simply because it felt like a whole culture shift or like vibe shift at Vanderbilt. And I think, yeah, you look at Pavia's numbers and sometimes you're kind of like, they're not like overwhelming in the passing department or whatever, but it's the rushing, it's everything that he gives you. The other thing is it felt like Vanderbilt had this weird like belief, like after Pavia stepped in there, it's like the whole vibe changed. It's not like Vanderbilt's 3-9, they're not 4-8, they're not walking in with a chance to be a heavy underdog. They walked in thinking, oh, we got Diego Pavia, we got a chance to win this game. And so there's like the off-field sort of mental impact and also the on-field things that he brought to Vanderbilt last season too.
So the confidence and the momentum was turned around.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's bad. It's bad. No, he's just like, he's just so much fun to watch. He's the most fun and entertaining player I can remember in a Vanderbilt uniform in quite some time, and in football at least. So I think if they finish 13, I don't know how happy they are with that finish, but I also feel like it's difficult to move them up any further.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think we should note that as good as Pavia was last season, and I think they kind of, I don't want to say the SEC figured out Vanderbilt's offense because I'm not sure they did.
They're running a triple option.
Yeah, I mean, Pavia was hurt at the end of last season too, so I think that hindered their offense. But I think along with that, Vanderbilt's defensive improvement kind of got overlooked. Clark Lee took over the play calling duties. They gave up only 23 points a game. That was a significant improvement off of giving up 36 the year before. So I think the defense is on the right track. You've got your difference maker at quarterback. Yes, the schedule is difficult again, but if you're good around the margins and you have a player like Pavia who could be a difference maker, I can easily see this team getting back to a bowl game. I don't know the upside is 9 wins. It feels like it's probably a lot closer to like 7-5 or something.
I was at practice in camp last year, and there was still some talk in the local media and even with some of the folks inside the building that like they were trying to kind of like, oh, it may not be Pavia. And I was like, are you guys, what drugs are you on? And they had him listed at like 5'11" in the program. But I looked at them all again. I go, still, same question. What drugs are we on? I stood next to him. He's like 4 inches shorter than me. And that is why 192 carries at 5'8" ain't going to work very often in the SEC. But we'll see how healthy he is and see how healthy he stays. He should be must-watch television for the entire year. And another bowl game would be quite a statement for Clark Lee and the Commodores. All right, let's go back to the rankings here. Arkansas next up, number 14 on the list. Sam Pittman. Do you call it a stay of execution last year with the job that they did, or is there a chance for growth, or is there backsliding here? Because 14 is not all that great after a 7-win season last year.
It feels very much like a temporary kind of stay because when you look at what's coming up for Arkansas this season, another difficult schedule, but also they lost quite a bit off last year's team. Very heavy in the portal. Now they do have the one ultimate wild card, which is they have a difference maker at quarterback in Taylon Green. And he's the type of player, much like Pavia, who could carry a team to a win or two, an upset like they did over Tennessee that we don't see in maybe the preseason. So I think how they fill in around Taylon Green is a question. What is his growth in year 2 under Petrino? Quarterbacks usually perform pretty well under Petrino's second year. And then some holes to fill in defense. Got to get a lot better against the pass. So it feels very temporary for me. I have a hard time thinking Arkansas can make the jump from like 7 wins to like 9 wins this year.
The high-end talent, I still don't see very much of it. Like the elite play. I mean, Green's a really good player. But you just don't see the high-end talent scattered across the top of the roster very much. And that's sort of a big question for me. I was down in Mobile watching Landon Jackson, and he's a really good college player. He did not have a great week, and he was pushed around by guys from other conferences. And so that doesn't mean anything for this particular Arkansas team, but he was one of the best they had to offer is sort of what I'm getting at here.
Also, Andrew Armstrong, their top receiver, Jaquinton Jackson, awesome guys in the offensive line. So
I tend to agree with you. They could be closer to 16 than they could to top 25. 16th in the conference. Number 15 is the Kentucky Wildcats. And here's my thought on Kentucky. I'll let you talk about the depth chart, but this is like trending into apathy territory. That there's little to talk about and get excited about or be upset about with Kentucky because Stoops' tenure is so good. But when you change coordinators this often, you change quarterbacks this often, you change philosophies this often, you have to rebuild everything. I know on defense they're still very salty and very good, but they lost all their best front seven players. They lost a corner to the NFL draft. This is danger territory here. I don't think there's any chance he gets fired because the buyout is so high and the contract is ironclad. I thought he was going to retire at the end of the season or leave for another job. Kurt Ferentz is still at Iowa, so he's not leaving. This is dangerous territory here for Kentucky, I feel like, to sort of backslide into like they're not bad, but like irrelevant is also a bad place for Kentucky to be.
Well, I will make the case they were actually pretty bad last year because they were 1 4th down completion against Ole Miss. If Ole Miss just stops it, they are winless in the SEC last season, and they averaged 14 points a game in SEC play. And so it feels like the carousel of changing quarterbacks through the portal, hiring coordinators. Like I'm not necessarily sold on the Bush Hamden hire, and here they are replacing a lot of their offensive line, receivers, and running backs. So, and also their defense has been pretty much their hallmark. And it took a step back last year, and now they're replacing a lot of those guys like a Deion Walker and some of the other standouts. So I think I would agree with your assessment that it feels like apathy. There's not a lot of reasons to be optimistic right now for Kentucky.
Brutal situation. Tough league, great career and tenure for Stoops. Unsure how it's going to end. We shall see. Mississippi State at the very bottom, 16th. Not a lot for me to say here. 0-8 last year, 34 points a game on defense. Just bad. Why are they going to be better? Does Jeff Lebby master the NIL, Stark Vegas NIL deals?
I'll make a generous case for optimism. I think second year under Jeff Lebby with Blake Shapen running the offense when he's healthy, I think they'll score some points. I also think a heavy influx of transfers on defense will help. I mean, they really can't be much worse. They gave up almost 40 points a game in SEC play. So that's probably my generous interpretation. When you look at their schedule, they're likely to play about 7 conference games against ranked opponents this year. So 7 out of their 8 SEC games could be against top 25 teams. In other words, last year was year 0. This year is likely to be year 1.
Okay. Year 0, year 1, the old year 0. All right, let's go to the top here and let's start with the rankings. Number 1 is Ohio State in your rankings. They got to replace everybody. Why are they number 1?
If you ask me to, I would say I'd probably need to redo this list. And now that they've hired, Matt Patricia, a pretty questionable defensive coordinator hire. And after their losses to the NFL, if I had to redo this, I would probably put Texas at 1. But
all right, here, then let's go right to it.
Yeah.
Here are all 10 teams ranked in the Athlon Sports preseason way too early top 25 for 2025. And here we go. Number 2 is the Texas Longhorns. I think Texas or Penn State should be number 1 in the nation. I would lean Texas because of Arch Manning, Steve Sarkisian, and the talent level over Penn State. This Texas team is the front runner right now to win the SEC. I guess Arch Manning is, a question. I don't know. What are your biggest concerns with this Texas team? Why is this team not going to finally get over the semifinal hump that they have stopped at each of the last 2 years?
You were asking about Texas and the biggest questions for next year. I think our audio cut out on me, but sorry.
Why? No, you're good. Why are they going to be? I'll ask it again. Why are they going to get over finally the college football playoff semifinal hump that has stopped them each of the last 2 years?
I think Arch Manning can elevate this offense. I think Quinn Ewers was solid. I think Arch Manning could be on a different level. Also, from a defensive perspective, I know they are losing some pieces. I do think this group's going to be solid once again. You look at guys like Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill, Malik Muhammad, like they have stalwarts at every level coming back. And also there's just like the program growth, like Sarkisian does a really good job of recruiting and developing. So yeah, you're losing some guys, but you just kind of expect them to reload. So I think Manning raises your ceiling there. The biggest question I have would be the 4 new starters in the offensive line, because otherwise I feel like they're pretty solid everywhere else.
I mean, Bond, Golden, Helm, all 3 clutch players for Ewers. We saw them overcome adversity in the running backs with the injuries that they had last year. They just kept churning out a new player. So I'm not worried about the running game. And I think Sark is so good around the line of scrimmage on offense that I think they'll be fine. from a scheme standpoint. And Arch becomes a running threat immediately. They lose Jahdae Barrett, of course, which is going to be a big loss as a Thorpe Award-winning corner. He's really going to be more of a safety in the NFL, probably. I don't know. Are you worried about the supporting cast? Because that felt like the same thing we talked about the year before when they lost. Was it Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, and all those pieces, and Sanders, and like they just reloaded. The offensive line, I agree with you, is the biggest concern for me because Banks and Williams and all those guys are going to be very highly drafted.
I'm not too worried, and I think for two reasons. I think one is Sarkisian. I think he can scheme up as maybe he's the best play caller or one of the best in college football. I sort of just trust him to fill in the voids and keep things rolling. But also, you got guys like Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore at receiver who are ready to step up into larger roles. And it also plays into what we talked about with recruiting. They've done a great job of finding the next playmakers at receiver, certainly at running back too, because they're going to get CJ Baxter back, who missed the whole last season with an injury. So a good backfield is going to get even better with him coming back too.
So number 2 at number 1, first week of the season.
Yeah, we're talking about the hype, Arch and Jeremiah Smith and all the new pieces for Ohio State.
Look, this Texas team at Florida, that's going to be much trickier than it was last year. You got to go, of course, Georgia, and that one's actually in Stanford Stadium, I think, next year. Right. So it's not that, that one's going to be there. You got Kentucky on the road, Mississippi State on the road, A&M at home. It's a very manageable schedule. Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. It's a very manageable schedule. You could lose twice again and very easily be playing in the SEC championship game and be, as we saw Georgia last year do, be a 1 or a 2 seed in the playoff.
It would not surprise me to see them lose to Ohio State and lose to Georgia and win the national championship. As crazy as that sounds.
That's literally what Ohio State just did.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to number 3 in the top 25. That is the Georgia Bulldogs. How much of this, without their quarterback Carson Beck, and with what's probably going to be 7 or 8 players drafted on the defense, maybe less than that. Why is in the modern era when Kirby Smart has told us that you just don't have the same second and third tier depth that you used to have in college football based on the rules and roster management and portal and NIL, et cetera, et cetera. Why is this team capable of being number 3 in the nation?
I think ranking Georgia at 3 is very much a trust factor with Kirby Smart. And much like, yes, Texas has questions at the offensive line and receiver. You trust Sarkisian to figure it out. I trust Kirby Smart to sort of figure this out, whether it's the offense or the defense and all the turnover. I will say, I do think they have more questions, and questions are relative to Georgia because if you're talking about questions, is it like competing for the national championship or getting beat in the first round? They have probably more questions, like four new starters on the offensive line. I like the pickups of Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch at receiver. They've got to find some dudes who can actually catch the ball consistently. And, the development of Gunnar Stockton, I feel good about where he's going to be, but there is certainly going to be a transition period. And like I mentioned, just a ton of new faces on defense too. So a lot of questions, but also a lot of potential.
Anaya Smith made 2 really great catches down in practice at Mobile. And I was like, where was that all year?
Right.
They got Alabama and Ole Miss at home. Of course, those are the 2 big ones from last year that we were kind of circling on the road. This is interesting. I think this is a big win for Georgia to get Tennessee this early on the road. That game got moved all the way up to September 13th. That's very, very early in the year. I think that's a huge benefit to Georgia because I think Tennessee will be better at the end of the year than they will be at the beginning. I think they're replacing too much along both lines of scrimmage. They can win that game. I think the Auburn game on the road is real dangerous. Real dangerous. It's after the Alabama game in Kentucky, right before the Ole Miss game. That is a very scary circle the upset alert type of deal there. Florida, of course, is much better this year, gave them a good run. They got Texas at home, and then the Georgia Tech game wouldn't cost them in the SEC. But as Joe Tessitore made sure we knew on every 2-point conversion, this was for the spot in the playoffs. That Georgia Tech team is good. And going on the road after what happened last year, you could see that Georgia Tech team being pissed off for greatness in that game for sure. I don't know. I feel like 10-2 was as good as they were last year, and they're not as good this year. So I've got questions about Georgia. They're still worth being ranked very highly, but I got questions about Georgia.
Do you like the fact that they get Alabama also early in the season too?
Yes, but it's what is it, week 5?
Yeah,
I
September
think that at
27th.
least, and it's coming off a bye, which is very helpful. I do think that if you're sort of like, where are the two quarterback situations? I think Georgia's ahead of Alabama because of Stockton's experience in the postseason. So I think that does give him an edge. Look, you're at home. It's early in the year. You should win that game. You should win that game.
Agree. Yeah.
Auburn, Texas, Georgia Tech, Florida, Tennessee. I bet you could lose. I bet you lose two of them. 10-2 is the new benchmark, man.
Yeah, it is. But also, I think the same credit we probably were giving. You mentioned about Tennessee. Like, let's say the same thing about Georgia, which is, I would imagine by November 1st, Kirby Smart's going to figure out a lot of these things on both sides of the ball. So they'll be better in November than September.
November 1st, of course, is the Florida game in Jacksonville following a bye week. So there you go. I think it's always following a bye week, I think. So so that's the first tier. And then if you notice in our rankings, if you look at this on YouTube, you can see the rankings right now. And you drop down, but we got 4 or 5 teams all in one cluster here. And you've got LSU at the top of this list at number 9. If you want to hear about the other teams, you got Penn State at 4, Notre Dame at 5, Oregon at 6, Clemson at 7, Miami at 8. I think LSU is better than probably 2 of those teams at least. So I think LSU could be higher, but you've got LSU, Bama, Tennessee, South Carolina, all back to back to back to back. We'll go one at a time here. But why LSU the best out of this entire group here?
I am buying some stock in LSU right now. And I think for a couple reasons. One, Garrett Nussmeier should be one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. And I like their portal pickups at receiver to offset some of the losses that they have. Also, I would anticipate the defense being better in Blake Baker's second season. They were a little bit better last season. I would expect a much bigger step forward in 2025. So I just like the fact they have a difference maker at quarterback, and also think the defensive progression should catch up. One kind of concern I have is, how do you replace your 2 standout tackles? That's probably my biggest concern about LSU going into next season.
They've also lost 4 consecutive season openers, every one of Brian Kelly's career, and they will play at Clemson in week number 1. Clemson, I just mentioned, I think one of the few teams in the top 10 that is ascendant this year versus where they were last year. You saw how good they played at the end of the season, winning the ACC championship, and of course, playing very well against Texas in that playoff game. They bring everybody back. Their offense is really salty. So I agree with you. They're better, LSU, with Blake Baker in year number 2. I think they're going to be fine, but they will be challenged by 3 great receivers and a quarterback who can sling it. And on the road, another loss in a season opener may not cost them anything. It may not cost them an SEC championship, may not cost them a playoff spot, but a fifth straight season opening loss for LSU will not look good. And then you package it with Florida in week 3 at home, and then at Ole Miss in week 5. That's a really tough first 5 games for LSU. But if you get through it, it doesn't get any easier. LSU's scheduled very hard this year.
They do get Texas A&M at home, which is a positive, but they have to play, of course, at Alabama, and Alabama beat them pretty bad last year.
Top 10 teams coming to Vanderbilt. Watch out.
Yeah, that is.
You got South Carolina could be a playoff team. You're at Oklahoma. We mentioned they could be. We don't know what they're going to be at the end of the year. I just think there are a lot of losable games on the schedule for LSU if they are not elite. If they're elite, they win a lot of these games. But if they are not elite, I could go through here and go Alabama, Oklahoma on the road, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, A&M, Ole Miss, Florida, Clemson. All teams that could beat you if they play well. So,
do you? Maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves here, but do you like LSU higher, or do you like someone else behind them above LSU?
I like LSU and Bama at the top of this group of teams, which is where we've got them. We've got Bama at number 10 in the top 25. I think they both could be a couple of spots higher. I do think you gave a little bit too much credit to some of the teams that are replacing a lot. Like, I think Notre Dame's going to be good, but I don't think they're top 5 good. You got them at number 5. Oregon's replacing a lot. Miami is replacing a lot. Even Georgia and Ohio State are replacing a lot. I think the team on the trajectory up is definitely LSU. So I like them at the top of this list for sure. So I probably would go up with them. I think the rest of these teams we're about to talk about, I'm not sure if I would move many of them up. I think Alabama's appropriately slotted at number 10.
If it does, I like to go back to something we talked about at the beginning. It feels like, yeah, if Ty Simpson or one of the other Alabama quarterbacks, if Nussmeier hits, it would not surprise me to see one of these teams. And Sellers is very capable of carrying South Carolina to the SEC championship game. So I would not be surprised if one of these teams in this tier found their way to the championship game.
Why is Bama still a top 10 team? Just roster talent, trusting DeBoer. Defense is still going to be. You think they're better? I think the offensive line and the receiving core, way like one of the best collections in the country. So the quarterback's got to be figured out. But why Alabama top 10?
Defense. Bringing back most of the defense from last season. I think this is one of the better defenses in college football for 2025. I think offensively, I think getting Ryan Grubb back is a big deal. He had a cup of coffee in Tuscaloosa before last season. Now he's back after getting fired by the Seahawks. But I think, moving Nick Sheridan out of the play caller role, putting Ryan Grubb in there, he's one of Kalen DeBoer's top lieutenants. I think that pairing can mesh really well for the new quarterback. And you mentioned the offensive line, pretty solid, good receiving core. There's still a lot of talent. And I think you kind of have to trust that year 2, Kalen DeBoer will be better through the SEC. So that's kind of why I've got him at 10. I actually, after they hired Ryan Grubb, I would probably move them up maybe a spot or two along with LSU.
Look, I like Ryan Grubb a lot, but this is like the defense was the issue last year, wasn't the offense. Like the offense was, they went in there and abused LSU. Like it was disgusting. Like I was told that the entire Alabama offensive coaching staff was down on the field before the game was over. So I think this is a tough schedule though. I think they can come out of the gate fairly easily with, as long as you beat Florida State on the road, at Georgia, at Missouri, at South Carolina, at Auburn. That's the road games. Those are not easy. Not one of those is easy. You got Tennessee and LSU and Oklahoma all at home. There's a lot of top 15, top 20-ish type of teams on that schedule, and they're going to have to figure out their quarterback situation real fast when they come out of that Wisconsin game and go into the bye week in week 4. That's where they need to be on all cylinders going to Georgia by game number 5, week 5.
Are you worried about their quarterback situation?
I think they're super talented, but I think as we saw with last year and this year, just because you're super talented, have a lot of upside, and will be great, doesn't mean it happens right away. I think Jackson Arnold's going to be good. I think Nico's going to be great. I think that you still have to go out and sort of take your lumps a little bit. You got to go out and learn now, because there's just not as – I don't think you just can kind of come out of the box like a superstar. Those are transfers now, right? That's Jaden Daniels. That's Joe Burrow. That's, those guys, Hendon Hooker. All those guys who took the conference by storm were guys that had experience elsewhere. Nico, we're about to talk about Tennessee at number 11 here. And Lenore Sellers at 12. Lenore Sellers did not look good at the beginning of the season last year. But he learned, and he got so much better that he was great at the end of the year. Nico, I think, is going to be faced with a lot of challenges along the lines of scrimmage. But for Tennessee, I think that's a bigger issue, but I think he takes a step forward this year. So even if a freshman gets the job for Alabama, which I wouldn't be surprised if the kid from Texas gets the job, and I trust Kalen DeBoer. Are they going to win a bunch of games shutting people down? Maybe. I don't know. Alabama's fat. They're like Oklahoma. They're just utterly fascinating.
I think that's
for all the reasons.
That's the theme of the SEC, right? For next season is like fascinating, trying to get back to the top of college football after the Big Ten won the last 2. But that also gets at kind of what we're talking about here, like LSU under Brian Kelly. Can he get them to that next level? They won the SEC West a few years ago. Now it's trying to get back to the playoff. You've got to get Alabama, like under Kalen DeBoer. This was the program in college football under Nick Saban. And now you're kind of wondering where they are in his second season. So there's a lot of questions about this middle tier, but there's also a lot of potential to go with that.
I tend to agree. Alabama, Alabama, the questions are about quarterback and coach. Everything else is you kind of know what you're getting, but I think the schedule is much more difficult than people realize. All right, number 11 on the list, Tennessee. This is the one I think is too high. I think Tennessee is too high on this list. I would have them down behind Florida because they have to play at Florida, and Florida has not won that. Florida has not lost that game since I was in college in 2001. They will play that game, of course, way late in the year, like November 22nd for the first time in a very long time. Actually, 2001, I think that game was, because of 9/11, was moved to the back of the year. I think Tennessee is more like 16, 17, 18. I'm concerned about the line of scrimmage. Their best player, McCoy, is still battling the ACL tear. The secondary is still not all that special. They had receiver issues last year. Now they got to replace Sampson and some offensive linemen. It's going to be on Nico. Why do you think Tennessee is a top 12 team?
So I probably would move them down after, we kind of went through that first cycle after the national championship game, and after kind of taking a step back and looking at the rosters again a little closer. I probably would agree with your assessment. We have Tennessee probably a little bit too high. But I think if you're making the optimistic case, like, why could Tennessee be the 11th best team in college football next year and make the playoff again? It is development at the quarterback position. It is Nico taking that step forward from being wherever he was in the conference last year to being a top 4 signal caller and taking on, shouldering more of the offensive workload. The potential is there. You see the talent. Can Heupel and that staff help him realize that? Because I think the situation you outlined there's no Dylan Sampson, rebuild offensive line, defense has some losses. You start to, Heupel has done a good job of molding the team to his strengths every year. Now his strength is going to have to be back on the quarterback. So I don't know they necessarily get back to the Hendon Hooker level production at quarterback, but I think I could easily talk myself into him being better in his second year as a starter.
Oh, I think he's better, but the question is, does he have time to throw? Does he have a star receiver? Matthews didn't turn out to be the 5-star last year. He will be better, I assume. And he'll find guys, but like, this is the first year where they're going to lose like 10, 11, 12 veterans, seniors that are like married with kids. Like that was such an old roster. And I don't think people realize that got them through a lot of struggles where they had to win games with defense and running the football. And the rotation up front, Pierce is gone. Amari Thomas is gone. These guys have been around a long time. Norman Lott gone. Like they got to replace a lot of guys. The linebackers got hurt and they're gone. Like, now the good news for Tennessee, in my opinion, I agree. Quarterback with Heupel, great combination, but also I think the schedule is very manageable.
Yes.
If you give them the losses to teams that you just think are better, and Georgia and Alabama are really the only two that are clearly, in my opinion, just better on paper. That's 2 losses because you're at Alabama. Otherwise, every other game is winnable. Maybe the Florida game, because of the curse, you just say, fine, loss. But Vanderbilt could be sneaky good. You get them at home. Oklahoma could be better. You get them at home. You went on the road and won that game, very emotional game early in the year last year. It's a good year to go to Mississippi State and 2 Kentucky. Like, yeah, it just is. We just talked about they're the worst 2 teams potentially on paper. You get Arkansas back at home in a revenge game. You can win a lot of games. Syracuse is losing Kyle McCord. You could still win 8 or 9 games here and not be as good as last year.
Absolutely. I would buy that too. I think that's another reason for optimism for Tennessee, is a very, very favorable path to the playoff again.
Yeah, you miss LSU, you miss South Carolina, you miss Texas. You miss all these teams. Speaking of South Carolina, let's go to there. South Carolina, they are right behind Tennessee at number 12 in the list. Just Shane Beamer has overachieved 3 out of 4 years. The other season that was bad was due to the schedule. Sellers, the defensive line, the way they played in big games against teams like Alabama, they showed everything on paper last year and then got better and better as the year went along. Outside of that first game against, was it Old Dominion, where they were terrible? Other than that, they've shown all the signs of a team building to this season to be even better this year. That's why I'm hesitant, because they've never really done it, but I could be on board with them being a top 15 team.
Shane Beamer's teams typically get better as the season goes along too. I think we've seen that pretty much every year, with the exception of the 5-7 season where they had a lot of guys hurt. But I think their optimism just starts at the quarterback position. Lenora Sellers is just good enough to elevate South Carolina from being a team that just missed the playoff to a team that gets there next season. There are some personnel things, like the offensive line. They lost some guys on the defensive front. Like, there are some personnel things, but it's almost like, yes, the schedule will be tough, but you just trust that if they can pick up where they left off, which is never easy, and Sellers continues to get better, the upside for this team is the college football playoff.
I like them kind of where they are in the rankings. I might have them a spot or 2 lower, but I do like them ahead of Tennessee, and I like them where they are in the conference, which is they are right in the challenger pack of, can we, if things go our way, we can play in the conference championship game. We can play in Atlanta at the end of the year. Now, I think they need to win a lot. They need to stack wins early. And there's some tricky games in there. You got Virginia Tech, your Vanderbilt at home, at Missouri. You just got to win the games you're supposed to. And if you handle those games, your defensive line and your quarterback should be good enough to get you through some of those games. Then the schedule gets real tough. And the back half of the schedule is real hard. Road trips to LSU, to Ole Miss, to A&M. You got Alabama, Oklahoma, and Clemson all at home. It is there are 4 or 5 potential playoff teams on that schedule in the back half of the season. So they're going to earn it. Whatever South Carolina wins this year, they're going to earn it for sure.
Definitely, like you said, make up ground early, and of course we get the Beamer Bowl in week 1 with South Carolina playing Virginia Tech down in Atlanta, I think.
I like it. South Carolina, a lot of upward trajectory, very obvious. But people very bullish on them. I think they're going to have to prove it early, and if they do that, they got a chance to pull some upsets later in the year. All right, number 14 on the list, and this is a lot of you're buying this team a lot. One player, Billy Napier, on the verge of getting fired midway through the season. He saves his job because DJ Lagway is real good at football. He makes a bunch of coaching changes on the defensive side of the ball. So there's that. I still think 14 is a little high here. I think I'd have them closer to Ole Miss and A&M down in that 18, 19, 20 range. Why are you buying Florida as the team that jumps into this group out of largely nowhere, Stephen? Midway point through this season, they were not good.
Let's have fun with small sample sizes, right? If you go the last stretch of the season, if you look at, we'll talk about the quarterback in a minute, but the defense held LSU to 16, held Ole Miss to 17. I know Florida State was bad on offense, and Tulane was missing their starting quarterback in the bowl game, but they held those two teams to a combined 19 points. Their defense was a question from coming into last season and for most of last year, and it was better down the stretch. So I think with a lot of personnel coming back, another year in the system, I think there should be some optimism that they can pick up, not necessarily where they left off, but they will be better on defense. And then it goes back to DJ Lagway is the type of quarterback who could elevate this offense. I think he just gives them the better ability to stretch the field, more so than Graham Mertz. And I think you also saw, like, in bits and pieces last year, there are things to work on, but the upside is enormous. And he was a big reason why they won those last 4 games of the season. So some of this is, I like the way they finished. I love the quarterback, and I think the defense is on the right track.
So last year they lose to Miami and A&M, both at home. You got Georgia neutral field, at Texas, and at Tennessee. Where are the switches this year? Where are the flips? Because you beat LSU. Now that game's on the road. You lost to Miami. They lose Cam Ward, but now that game's on the road. You got Texas at home, but we just talked about Texas being number 1 in the nation potentially. You lose to A&M. You get smoked by A&M. A&M returns a lot of those players, and you got to go on the road. Tennessee could be a flip. You lost to Tennessee last year. You could win that game this year. I still think they're closer to 8-4, and 8-4 is not number 14 in the nation. I think they could be better and still be an 8-win team.
Their early over-under is like 6.5, which seems very low to me. But then you start looking at schedule, you're like, well, it's not totally crazy. They, like you said, they could be better, but it just may not show up in the schedule, in the wins and losses.
I think I'd have them closer to Ole Miss. I think they're right there with Ole Miss. And frankly, the Florida at Ole Miss game might decide where they finish in the standings, probably. Speaking of, so then you got Kansas, you got Arizona State, by the way, at 13. You got Kansas State at 15, who I really love. BYU at 16, who I like. SMU and Indiana, I think they take major steps back. So there's some space there, I think, for teams to move forward. Ole Miss at number 19, Texas A&M at 20, Missouri at 25, the last 3 teams we're going to talk about today. Let's go to Ole Miss. Like, you're replacing Jackson Dart. You're replacing Trey Harris. You're replacing 3 dominant defensive linemen. Can they do that again in the portal?
I don't know if they necessarily have the high-end additions like a Walter Nolan this year in the portal, but I still think their portal class is one of the better ones in the SEC and one of the better ones in the country. So I think if you're making the case for like Ole Miss is too low here, it's that Lane Kiffin has had double-digit wins in 3 out of the last 4 years. They had the best season in school history. They're on the right track. Like, the trajectory is going up. They've got the right formula of high school transfers. You trust sort of Lane Kiffin and Pete Golding to figure this out as the year goes on. But also, I think Austin Simmons, their new starting quarterback, Jackson Dart leaves big shoes to fill, but I think Austin Simmons is going to be very good. So I think Kiffin's offense, Pete Golding's done a good job on defense. Maybe they're not as dominant on either side of the ball necessarily, but they're still very good, I think, going into 2025.
You get LSU at home, you get South Carolina at home, you get Florida at home. All 3 of those tough games. You go to Georgia, which, of course, if you want to just put down a loss there. But otherwise, at Oklahoma's tricky. Watch out for that one. I know that was a weird game last year. You got the Kentucky game they lost last year. That's on the road this year. I don't know. I think they're similar. I think they're in 8-4, 9-3 again. And I think that would be a compliment to Lane Kiffin in the quarterback situation. I just think the high-end elite level talent that were veterans, they were scattered all over the roster. and they choked against Kentucky, and it cost them a playoff spot. Otherwise, they would have gotten in my opinion, over Tennessee. And so I don't know. I look at this now, and you're like, are you going to beat Georgia, LSU, South Carolina, Florida, Oklahoma? I don't know. I think it's tough. So I think they're. Are they like? I wish I could combine Tennessee and Ole Miss into one team.
Ole Miss's schedule though is pretty favorable though. If you have
early on, yeah.
They have just, by the way, I have them for just 4 returning starters next year. So if you have that few returning starters and whatever that means in the transfer era, but getting LSU and South Carolina and Florida at home is pretty nice.
All after, by the way, and these aren't easy games, but they should be winnable games if you're number 19 in the nation. At Kentucky, Arkansas, Tulane, 3 of your first 4. You got Georgia State to start. So you got to start 4-0 going before you host LSU at home, which is just a great Magnolia Bowl there. It's just fantastic. I love that game. That might be a road trip this year. I haven't been down to the Grove in a long time. I might have to go back down there. So Ole Miss, fascinating. I think it's the high-end talent that holds them back. Still lost three times last year with all that high-end talent. So we shall see. Texas A&M. Why not higher on Texas A&M? We've got them at number 20 in the rankings. This is a team that brings Marcel Reed back, another year with the Colin Klein, a second year of Mike Elko. There's a lot of reasons to like this team. A lot. What's going on here at 20?
I think a lot of reasons definitely to be optimistic for everything you said, and a much improved receiving core too, which should help Marcel Reed. I think the one thing that worries me is the high-end defensive talent they're losing on the defensive line. Scorton, Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, 3 big-time difference makers. Also, the secondary, which was the point of Mike Elko's anger after the Las Vegas Bowl loss to USC. Can it be better? But again, to go back to the optimism, if you have a guy in Marcel Reed that I think can take the next step, they've got all 5 starters back on the offensive line. Their skill talent's good. Frankly, 20th might be a little low for A&M. I think the question, of course, is always, can they realize their potential? I think Elko will get them there. Does it happen in 2025? I think that's the big question.
So I'm looking at of the top teams in the rankings here. Texas A&M will miss Georgia, Bama, and Tennessee. According to you, that's 3 of the top 5. They'll miss Ole Miss as well, which is ahead of them in the rankings according to this. They get South Carolina and Florida at home, which are 2 of the lower-rated teams in that group. Still very good teams, but lower-rated. And then Texas and LSU on the road. So if you lose to Texas and LSU, the biggest rivals that they have, if you lose to those 2 on the road, you don't play 3 of the other top 5. You don't play Ole Miss, and then you get South Carolina and Florida at home. While it does look hard, you still got to go to Missouri, I guess. You got to go to Arkansas, and the Notre Dame game early is going to be tricky. But Notre Dame, that's the time you want to get them, is early. And yes, you'd rather have them at home, but early in the season will be good when they replace so much talent. The schedule is also manageable for A&M. I like them higher in the list, honestly.
Are you concerned at all about the way they finished the season, or like they lost to Auburn, of course, and they lost to Texas? I guess none of those really worry me. I know that's kind of a narrative.
They lost to Texas,
right?
They gave up. I mean, their defense played great in that game. And the Auburn game was like quadruple overtime. At South Carolina was surging into the playoffs at that period of time. My issue, and honestly, what I think is fair, especially considering how well they played against LSU, I think the week before all of that, is that you got to expect in a year one for the sort of like momentum to sort of fade at the end of the year. It's just very normal and natural. You come out of the gate with a lot of anticipation. They crushed Florida on the road last year. I just think the culture and the implementation of the systems helps you withstand the entire season this year. And I think that's a year 2 thing by and large for most coaches at this level. So I'm not as concerned. I think you can make the USC game I don't care about. You lose to Texas after 10 years, that game is almost a one-off for both teams. Like you almost can't make any judgments about either team because they hadn't played for 12 years or whatever it was. So I don't know. At Auburn, crazy game, overtime, probably should have won that game. You definitely should have played better against South Carolina, but they're really good. They were really good at that time too. So I would move this other team down here, the last one on our list, the Missouri Tigers. I think Auburn. I think I'd have Auburn ahead of Missouri. Bo Pabrula. Why do you like Missouri as a top 25 team?
pretty favorable schedule, to be honest with you.
Again,
I hate to like repeat ourselves about the schedule, but the schedule's pretty favorable for a team breaking in a new starting quarterback, a couple new receivers, offensive linemen. They got some personnel questions, but I think in the big picture, Missouri having 21 victories over the last 2 seasons, like there is I think fair to say a little bit of a trust factor with this Missouri team that, yeah, they're going to lose some guys, but you kind of trust them to fill in the gaps and go forward under Eli Drinkowitz, and especially with that schedule. I do think it is fair to wonder how good Bo Prabula is going to be. I mean, I know Missouri fans are excited about him, and rightfully so, but pretty small sample size at Penn State is kind of a change of pace player.
Really good athlete, so they're going to run him a little bit, right? The way Brady Cook did 2 years ago. I mean, that Kansas game is a game I'm circling. Like, they'll play Kansas in the border war. They could lose that game at home. South Carolina at home, I would circle that as a loss. Alabama at home, I'd circle that as a loss. At Auburn, I think I'd circle as a loss. At Vanderbilt, they could lose. A&M, at Oklahoma, at Arkansas. Like, there's a lot of games in there they could lose. And they're going to have to be all the questions you have about this team. They're going to have to answer all of them to win them. I think they're closer to like 7-5 this year.
No Texas, no Georgia.
I hear you.
No LSU. I can talk myself into this being a schedule play more than anything right now.
Okay. 7-5. You don't like 7-5. Okay. Here's what I would do. I would move up Auburn and maybe a touch of Oklahoma. Not sure about Oklahoma. I'd move down Tennessee, Florida, and Missouri. I might move up A&M. I think that's kind of where I'm at. I actually think the gap between LSU and Alabama is maybe a little bit greater. So I might have LSU like closer to 6 or 7 or 8, and I might have Alabama at about 10. I might move Tennessee down a few spots. I don't know. What you've already mentioned a few of the changes you'd make. Do you have any last minute sort of like, hey, I really think we should do, this is a team to watch that could really move in our rankings as we kind of do this again and again over the course of the offseason?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it, but I think I would move LSU a lot closer to Clemson. I mean, they'd be back-to-back essentially probably in the first rankings and they play, but A&M, I would probably move up a few spots. Maybe I was too harsh on A&M for the way they finished the season, but still very optimistic about Mike Elko and his tenure there.
All just teams that are already ahead of them in the rankings, right? I mean, other than Auburn. Yeah. So we'll see. Steven, listen, go to ML Rose if you're in Nashville, Tennessee, of course. Please go check them out. 6 great locations, craft beer, craft burgers. Great place to watch football games. Great place to watch basketball games. The SEC, the best basketball conference in America right now. Make sure you check them out. You got brunch and drink specials every Saturday and Sunday. So if you're going in to watch a college basketball game, they got TVs everywhere. You can watch EPL soccer if you want to. I had the Everton Premier match on while we were doing the show. Don't ask me why. But they got TVs everywhere. Great vibes. 6 locations all across Middle Tennessee. So make sure you check out ML Rose. Craft beer and burgers. Absolutely one of the best set of taps you're ever going to see in Nashville, Tennessee. Great local beers. Always doing good work to support good local breweries, so make sure you check them out. And, of course, Athlon Sports, athlonsports.com. You can check out Steven Lassan's work there and go buy you a magazine. You got racing, baseball, and soon the NFL draft coming up on newsstands now, so order those magazines or go to a newsstand and pick up one of those. Anything else I'm missing you want to promote here, big guy?
Just check out athlonsports.com because we are going to have so much college football content coming, as many previews, predictions, rankings to keep spring practice going all the way through the magazine release. So plenty of college football content coming soon.
Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out for the week. We do appreciate you filling in for Godfrey, and the check's in the mail, my guy. So thank you.
I don't know if I could fill in for Godfrey. He's got pretty big shoes to fill.
Oh, he's like 6'4". I agree. All right. Thumbs up on the notifications on the YouTube page. We do appreciate you guys. Share the product. Tell somebody about it. That's how the word gets out. We got lots of interviews coming in the offseason, and Godfrey's back as well. So we do appreciate you, Steven. Make sure you check out his work. And thanks, everybody, for listening and hanging out. We'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks.